March 30th, 2025, Alexandria, Louisiana. It was a little after 4:30 in the morning when police rushed to an apartment on the 5900 block of Ronmar Drive. A neighbor's desperate 911 call had reported shouting, banging, then silence. When officers entered, they braced for a chaotic domestic dispute. Instead, they stepped into stillness. Two people were on the floor, lifeless. The woman was 38-year-old Chaterica Smith. The man was her husband, 42-year-old Tracy Johnson. Both had been shot. Tracy's wound appeared self-inflicted. Within minutes, investigators labeled the scene what it was: an apparent murder-suicide. To friends, family, and thousands online, this made no sense. And Tracy weren't supposed to end like this. They were the couple everyone envied: romantic trips, matching outfits, endless smiles. Theirs was the kind of relationship people pointed to when they said, "That's love." But looks deceive. Behind closed doors, resentment was growing. Insecurity was spreading. Control was tightening. And in the end, the man she once called her safe place would become her greatest threat. To understand how it came to this, we need to go back. Back to before the wedding, before the arguments, before the 911 call. We need to know who Chaterica really was. Born on November 9th, 1986, in Alexandria, Louisiana, Chaterica Smith was raised by her mother, Terry Smith. Those close to the family say Terry wasn't just a parent, but a constant source of support and encouragement. The two shared a bond that shaped Chaterica's entire outlook on life. Her friends called her a light. She was the kind of person you noticed in a crowd, not just because of her looks, but because she radiated energy. She laughed loudly, hugged tightly, and carried a presence that made others feel at ease. She had two big passions growing up: dance and fashion. Dance gave her an outlet for her energy. She loved to move, and she loved the way performing made her feel alive. Fashion, on the other hand, was her form of self-expression. She put together bold outfits that showed confidence and creativity. Later, her social media would become full of those same looks: bright, daring, unforgettable. At Peabody Magnet High School, she was everywhere: student activities, social circles, school events. People remember her as magnetic. Teachers described her as driven. Classmates described her as unforgettable. She graduated in 2005 with honors, leaving a trail of memories behind her. And as an adult, that spirit only grew stronger. She was known for her compassion as much as for her style. She gave without hesitation. Whether someone needed a ride, a meal, or just encouragement, she was there. To many, she wasn't just a friend. She was family. In her 20s, Chaterica fell in love with a man we'll call Chris. They were young, carefree, and deeply connected. Not long into their relationship, she found out she was pregnant. For some couples, this would be terrifying. For them, it was joyful. They embraced parenthood. And soon, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Kinsley. Motherhood lit up a new side of Chaterica. Her social media filled with photos and videos, baby smiles, first steps, silly moments. She adored sharing her little girl's milestones. Soon after, she gave birth to a son. Now a mother of two, her days revolved around her children. They became her world. But raising kids is never easy. The pressures of parenting strained her relationship with Chris. Over time, arguments grew. The love faded. Eventually, they separated. Even so, Chris remained part of the children's early years. And for Chaterica, the breakup was a turning point. She was ready for something new. That's when Tracy Johnson came into her life. Tracy was older, confident, and attentive. He treated her like she was everything he'd been searching for. He showered her with gifts, planned thoughtful dates, and constantly reminded her how much she meant to him. To friends, it looked like a fresh start. To her, it felt like real love. What made it more meaningful was how Tracy treated her children. He embraced them, and that made the relationship feel like more than romance. It felt like a family. On social media, their chemistry was obvious. They posted videos laughing together, photos on trips, matching outfits. They were affectionate in public and playful online. People admired them. Many even envied them. After a few years of dating, Tracy proposed. She said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was everything she dreamed of. She called it the happiest day of her life. From the outside, their love story looked perfect. But inside the marriage, things were beginning to shift. At first, the changes were subtle. Tracy had always been attentive. But now, his attention became something else, something controlling. He started criticizing the way she dressed. He didn't like her traveling so often. He made comments about how much time she spent on social media. The very things that had drawn him to her, her confidence, her independence, her style, were the same things he began to resent. Chaterica wanted balance. She wanted to be a wife and mother, but also herself. To her, going out with friends, posting photos, and enjoying life didn't mean she loved Tracy any less. But to him, it felt like she was slipping away. Those close to her began to notice the changes. Some said Tracy seemed moody, quick to anger, and increasingly controlling. Others recalled arguments that escalated quickly whenever she came back from a trip or shared a new photo online. Her friends worried. But like so many women in situations like this, Chaterica believed it was manageable. She thought she could balance her independence with her marriage. What she didn't realize was that Tracy's resentment was growing into something darker. Scroll through her posts from that time and you'd see confidence. Smiling on vacations, dancing at parties, wearing bold outfits. But for Tracy, those posts weren't harmless. They were reminders of his insecurities. Every caption, every photo, every trip sparked new arguments. And slowly, the man who had once adored her became the man who feared losing her. By early 2025, their relationship was tense. Friends saw more arguments. Tracy's behavior became less predictable. He was losing control of his jealousy. And then came the early hours of March 30th. The fight started in their apartment. Neighbors heard yelling, then the sound of gunfire. When police arrived, it was over. Chaterica was gone, shot by the man she had once trusted with her life. Tracy turned the gun on himself moments later. News spread quickly. The community was stunned. Friends, family, and thousands online couldn't process it. How could the couple who looked so happy end like this? For many, the tragedy was a brutal reminder that what we see online is not always the truth. Behind the filters and smiles, there was conflict, control, and insecurity. Chaterica's children lost their mother in the most devastating way. A GoFundMe was created to support them and cover funeral expenses. Donations poured in, showing just how deeply she was loved. Her funeral was filled with grief and disbelief. Friends remembered her as vibrant, stylish, and compassionate. Family spoke of her laughter, her love for her kids, and the way she always gave to others. The community mourned not just the loss of Chaterica, but the shocking way it happened. Taken by the very man she once trusted most. Chaterica's death left painful lessons behind. First, that social media can hide reality. What looked perfect online was unraveling in private. Second, that jealousy and control, if unchecked, can escalate into tragedy. And finally, that the people we see smiling in photos may be struggling behind closed doors in ways we'll never know. Her children will grow up without their mother. Her family will carry her memory forever. And her community will remember her not for the way she died, but for the joy and love she brought while she lived. From the outside, it looked like the perfect love story, but beneath the surface, it was falling apart. Chaterica was vibrant, independent, and full of life. Tracy was insecure, controlling, and afraid of losing her. And when his fear became too much, he made sure no one else would have her, ending both of their lives in a single, irreversible act. This is the story of Chaterica Smith, a woman full of love, laughter, and light, taken too soon by the man who once promised her forever. While this case comes to a close, the tragedy doesn't stop here. In another city, another family was living through their own nightmare. Different names, different faces, but the same heartbreaking pattern. Love, control, and violence that ended in the worst possible way. Let's move to the next story. March 5th, 2021. St. Louis, Missouri. It was almost midnight when a neighbor heard the sound. At first, it was faint, like something hitting glass. Then came the shouts. Then the gunfire. When police arrived at the McCulley home, the window was shattered. The house was wrecked. Inside lay 34-year-old Roseanne McCulley. Next to her, her 13-year-old son, Caden Johnson. And nearby, her 6-year-old daughter, Kay Brooks. All three were gone. The killer, her own husband, and the most chilling part, Bobby McCulley had vanished into the night, taking their 1-year-old daughter with him. The city of St. Louis was about to learn the truth, that this wasn't a sudden explosion of violence. This was the end result of years of abuse, years of ignored warnings, and years of cries for help that went unanswered. This is the tragic story of Roseanne "Rosie" McCulley. To the people who knew her, Rosie wasn't just another name in a crime report. She was vibrant, creative, always chasing new ideas. She ran her own small business, Glitter on the F, where she made custom designs, often staying up late to finish orders. She believed in independence, in making her own money, in building something that belonged to her. Friends said Rosie was the kind of woman who lit up a room. She had a sharp sense of humor, and she loved making people laugh. She was also fiercely protective of her kids. Every decision she made, every side hustle, every late night of work, was about giving them a better future. At the same time, Rosie carried her struggles quietly. She was strong in public, but in private, she was surviving something darker. Rosie was a mother of 3. Caden, her teenage son, who loved sports and video games. Kay, her sweet 6-year-old daughter who loved helping in the kitchen. And the baby, barely a year old, who was still learning to walk. She poured herself into her kids. Photos on social media showed birthdays, school achievements, small celebrations that meant everything to her. To Rosie, her children were her anchor, and they were also her motivation to leave the man who was destroying her behind closed doors. Rosie had known Bobby McCulley for years. Their relationship started like many others. Fun, chemistry, promises. But the longer they were together, the more his true nature revealed itself. He was controlling, he was jealous, and when he lost his temper, it was terrifying. By 2017, things had gotten so bad that Rosie filed a domestic violence complaint. She wanted protection, but with little evidence, and her own decision not to press charges, the case went nowhere. Like many women, Rosie stayed, hoping things would change, hoping Bobby could be the man she wanted him to be. In July 2018, they got married. On the outside, it looked like a new chapter. She wore her wedding smile with pride, but the reality was very different. After the wedding, the abuse only got worse. Neighbors reported hearing fights constantly, for nights a week, sometimes more. Yelling, crashing objects, Rosie crying. Her social media began to reflect the abuse. At times, she posted about being in the hospital, about being stomped so badly that she needed for morphine, about the shame she felt when she looked at her injuries. In one chilling post, she admitted she couldn't even recognize herself in the mirror after a beating. And then came the moment that shocked even her closest friends. Bobby commented publicly on one of her posts. Instead of denying what he had done, instead of apologizing, he mocked her. He wrote, "More to come." It wasn't just violence. It was psychological terror. He wanted her and everyone else to know that he was in control. In the first 2 months of 2021 alone, Rosie made multiple 911 calls. Reports of domestic violence. Reports of him refusing to leave. Each time, the response felt too little, too late. Sometimes he was given a light warning. Sometimes nothing happened at all. The truth is, Rosie was in one of the most dangerous stages of abuse. She was preparing to leave. Experts say this is when abusers are most likely to kill, when they feel their control slipping. But instead of protection, Rosie was left exposed. By February 2021, Rosie had had enough. She kicked Bobby out of the house. She asked publicly for help removing his belongings. She began divorce proceedings. Friends thought she was finally free, but Bobby wasn't done. To him, losing Rosie wasn't an option. That Friday night, around 8:30 p.m., neighbors saw Bobby breaking into Rosie's home. They called the police. Officers came. They looked around. They didn't find anything unusual, so they left. Hours passed. Then came the screams. Then the gunshots. This time, when officers forced their way inside, they were too late. Rosie was dead. Caden was dead. Kay was dead. The baby was gone. At 4 a.m., authorities issued an Amber Alert. Rosie's 1-year-old daughter was missing, and police feared Bobby had taken her. The alert went out across the city. TV, radio, phones, billboards. Bobby's picture was everywhere. His car description was everywhere. Thankfully, within hours, the baby was found safe at a relative's home. But while her life was spared, her siblings and mother were gone. Police launched a citywide manhunt for Bobby. They tracked his car through surveillance footage, spotted him near Goodfellow Boulevard, then followed him to North St. Louis. When they finally cornered him in his car, Bobby had one last choice to make. Instead of facing justice, he pulled the trigger on himself. The man who had terrorized Rosie for years, who had stolen 3 innocent lives, chose to escape accountability. The aftermath was filled with grief and anger. Friends wept openly, remembering Rosie's humor and love for her kids. Neighbors admitted they had been afraid for years, hearing the fights through the walls. Advocates pointed out the obvious. Rosie had asked for help. She had filed complaints. She had posted about the abuse. She had called 911, and yet nothing stopped the tragedy. At vigils, purple balloons were released into the sky, symbols of domestic violence awareness and of the lives lost. At rallies, her mother and friends demanded change. They wanted stronger protections for women in abusive relationships. They wanted police to take every call seriously. Rosie's story is heartbreaking, but it's also a reminder. Abuse doesn't always look like a bruise. Sometimes it looks like constant criticism. Sometimes it looks like isolation. Sometimes it looks like a Facebook comment that everyone dismisses as a joke. Her story shows what happens when warnings are ignored, when abusers are given second chances, when the system doesn't act until it's too late. Today, Rosie's surviving daughter is growing up without her mother or siblings. Her family continues to honor her memory, and her case continues to be cited by advocates as proof that more must be done to protect women trying to escape abusive partners. While this case comes to a close, the tragedy doesn't stop here. In another city, another family was living through their own nightmare. Different names, different faces, but the same heartbreaking pattern. Love, control, and violence that ended in the worst possible way. Let's move to the next story. March 27, 2024, Little Rock, Arkansas. Police respond to a frantic 911 call. The address, 4704 Fairley Drive. Inside, they find 36-year-old Edwina Brown, bleeding from a gunshot wound. She's rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. But despite every effort, she doesn't make it. The shooter, her estranged husband. But this isn't just another case of domestic violence. This story has a chilling twist, because more than 10 years earlier, this same man had already tried to kill her. And in one of the most shocking decisions imaginable, 2 weeks after that first attempt, Edwina married him. This is the tragic and complicated story of Edwina Brown. Edwina was born on May 16, 1986, in Little Rock, Arkansas. She was the youngest of 4 on her mother's side and the third of 9 on her father's side. She grew up in a close-knit but challenging environment. Despite hardships, she developed resilience, warmth, and drive. She attended John Lynn High School, where she was known as outgoing and funny. After graduating, she went on to the University of Arkansas at Pulaski Tech, earning an associate's degree. Edwina had ambition. She worked as a phlebotomy technician, then shifted into entrepreneurship with her clothing line, Audacious Beauty Boutique. Customers loved her bold styles, and she built a loyal following. She was also deeply creative. She loved to dance, mentoring younger girls, and even coaching the Bejeweled dance team for 4 years. On top of that, she raised her daughter, Danielle Michelle, from a previous relationship. Edwina seemed unstoppable, balancing work, passion, and and motherhood, but her love life would lead her into a cycle of danger. Around 2012, Edwina met 27-year-old Danny Maurice Brown. Danny was charming, confident, and funny. To outsiders, he seemed like the life of the party. But beneath that charm was darkness, an obsessive, controlling nature. Edwina eventually saw his true side. He was jealous, possessive, quick-tempered. She tried to move on, finding love with a new man, 22-year-old Daniel Hill, who treated her with kindness and respect. But Danny wasn't willing to let her go, and what happened next would set the stage for years of tragedy. On January 3, 2012, Danny did the unthinkable. Consumed by jealousy, he hired 2 gunmen to ambush Edwina and Daniel Hill as they returned to their apartment on Green Mountain Drive. In seconds, gunfire erupted. Daniel Hill was shot multiple times and killed. Edwina was shot in the shoulder but survived. The gunmen were caught, convicted, and sentenced to decades in prison. But Danny, the mastermind, escaped accountability. Why? Because a key witness refused to cooperate. Prosecutors had no choice but to drop the capital murder charge. And then came the most shocking twist of all. 2 weeks after burying her boyfriend, Edwina married Danny Brown. Friends were stunned. How could she marry the man responsible for her boyfriend's death, and the man who had nearly killed her too? Theories vary. Some believe Danny manipulated her, convincing her that he was the only one who truly loved her. Others think fear played a role, that marrying him was the safest option. Whatever the reason, Edwina tied herself to the man who had already proven he was capable of killing for control. For nearly 11 years, Edwina and Danny stayed together. They even had a son, Danny Brown III. On social media, they posted skits and family moments. To outsiders, it looked like they had rebuilt their lives. But behind closed doors, the same cycle of jealousy and control was present. Danny had not changed. He still carried the same obsessive, violent streak. And as the years went on, the marriage began to fracture. Edwina was ambitious, creative, and social. She loved posting videos, running her business, and sharing her humor online. Danny didn't like that. He saw her independence as a threat. Arguments escalated. Control turned into intimidation, and intimidation turned into violence. Eventually, Edwina separated from him. She tried to start over, living apart, raising her children, and focusing on her work. But Danny wasn't ready to let go. That afternoon, Danny showed up at Edwina's home on Fairley Drive. What started as an argument quickly turned deadly. In a fit of rage, Danny pulled out a gun and shot her. She was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't survive. The man who had tried to kill her more than a decade earlier had finally finished what he started. Danny fled the scene. For more than a week, he evaded police. He even taunted them, calling and warning that if cornered, he'd hurt himself or others. The U.S. Marshals joined the manhunt. On April 5, 2024, they tracked him to an apartment in Dallas, Texas. Danny tried one last desperate escape, running toward a balcony. But when he looked down, officers were already waiting. Trapped, he finally surrendered. He was extradited back to Arkansas, charged with capital murder. News of Edwina's death devastated her community. Her family, friends, and students from her dance coaching days gathered for her funeral at Williams Temple in Little Rock. They remembered her as ambitious, funny, caring. A woman who had built a business, supported her kids, and inspired others. Her daughter Danielle was left without her mother. Her young son would now grow up knowing his father had murdered his mother. The pain was immeasurable. Edwina's case highlights one of the darkest realities of domestic violence. Many wondered why she stayed, why she married him after the first attack. But the truth is, abuse is complex. Victims often face manipulation, fear, and false hope that things will change. Her story also exposes flaws in the justice system. Danny should have been behind bars after the 2012 ambush. Instead, he was free, and that freedom cost Edwina her life. Her death is a reminder. When abusers show you who they are, believe them. When systems fail to hold them accountable, lives are at risk. Edwina Brown survived one murder attempt, but more than a decade later, the man she had once forgiven became her executioner. Her life, her dreams, and her future were stolen, and her story leaves us with a chilling truth. Ignoring abuse doesn't make it disappear. It only delays the inevitable.